Well guys, it's that time of the year where we get to talk about things we cannot afford. Mainly Buffalo Trace Antique Collection, but we'll have to go and talk about this guy instead. Colonel E.H. Taylor, and this is in fact kind of the most obtainable version of this bourbon, which if you're into whiskey at all, is probably one that you've definitely heard of, probably tried, but then see it for way too high above its MSRP anywhere you go. So this is specifically the small batch version. It's distilled by Buffalo Trace, and Buffalo Trace of course is a subsidiary of Sazerac. Has a room old aging of around 7 years, although that's never been confirmed. It definitely has to be at least 4 years aged because it's bottled in bond, and uses Buffalo Trace's mash bill number 1, which is known as the low rye mash bill. According to Wine Social, it sells for an average of around $125, but here in New York, I typically see it for about $100. Now it's a pretty solid bourbon, which is nice, with a good smell, a little bit of caramel on the nose, that little dash of cherry you expect. Smells good. You just really get some of that like caramel corn, butterscotch, a little tad bit of like anise or like licorice. Yeah, and then there's a soft mouthfeel in the end with subtle spices of pepper and tobacco. And then ultimately too, we'll talk about price before. I've been reading it has an MSRP of around $45.99, which makes me sad because I definitely paid over that for this guy. The bottle and tube, which is kind of fun, comes in a tube, have a lot of interesting things on here. Full shelf, Colonel E.H. Taylor. Yeah, sounds like a bourbon guy. I believe it. Full Chanel, the awesome straight Kentucky bourbon of topmost class. Old-fashioned Copper Distillery, bottled in bond. Let the label be the truth. It's probably the most important thing about this guy. Let the label be the truth in high-quality whiskey. So while at the bottom here, it briefly explains who this Colonel E.H. Taylor was, let's actually talk about him. Who is him? Is he just made up? No, he's a real guy, and he's actually really important for the modern bourbon industry. Edmund Hayes Taylor was born on February 12, 1830 in the small city of Columbia, Kentucky. Very quickly, his life took an unexpected turn as his father passed away from typhus when he was at the age of 5. He went to go live with his great-uncle, future President Zachary Taylor, in New Orleans, Louisiana, where he began his education at Bowles French School. He eventually moved back to Kentucky, this time to Frankfort, where he was able to be kept under the care of his uncle, which was his namesake, also named Edmund Hayes Taylor. And during the time, he followed his uncle not into the distillery industry, but into the banking industry. Now, Taylor's experiences in the banking sector opened his eyes to the immense potential within distilleries. Recognizing these lucrative opportunities, he helped establish a private banking house specializing in the distilling industry, initially known as Gainsbury and Company in 1862, which was later reorganized as W.A. Gaines and Company in 1868. Now, Taylor was just one of the first people on the team. Doesn't mean he was necessarily a founding member. Taylor learned a lot about managing and financing distilleries, but soon wanted to know more about the actual process and embarked on a journey throughout Europe to learn more. At this point, he already had a European-style education when he was in New Orleans, so he ventured out to learn spirits from them, specifically looking at beer in Germany, Scotch in Scotland, and whiskey in Ireland. He returned back to the United States in 1868, and saw W.A. Gaines and Company acquire the Old Crow brand after the master distiller and owner, James C. Crow, passed away. James C. Crow was known for originating the sour mash style of whiskey, which uses spent mash from an older batch to start a new one. Around the same time, Taylor was also named the guardian of James Pepper, who was the son of deceased distillery owner Oscar Pepper. This allowed him to manage the distillery until young Pepper became of age. Today, the Oscar Pepper Distillery is still around and is producing Woodford Reserve. Now, with having these skills, and frankly, these distilleries under his belt, Taylor was ready to create something of his own. So he decided to leave W.A. Gaines and Company and purchase Leestown Distillery in 1869, and renamed it the Old File Copper Distillery, OFC. Taylor's relentless pursuit of excellence led him to rebuild the distillery using the latest techniques he had learned overseas and incorporated elements from the Old Crow and Oscar Pepper distilleries. However, his ambition and goals kind of got the best of him, which led Taylor into debt, prompting the St. Louis-based liquor firm Gregory & Stagg to acquire the OFC distillery from him. Taylor was also forced to sell the Oscar-Pepper distillery as well. He still continued to work at OFC, and his influence within the distillery and the whiskey scene in Frankfurt, Gregory and Stagg renamed it to the E.H. Taylor Jr. Company in his honor, despite having minimal shares within the company itself. Now, Taylor stayed at the company and helped oversee the construction of a new distillery nearby, known as the Carlisle Distillery, which opened its doors in 1883. It's still around today and is actually now known as the Buffalo Trace Distillery. However, Taylor was getting incredibly frustrated on the way that Stagg wanted to run things. Taylor cared about quality, like that was the #1 thing from him, while Stagg was focused on money. It was a business after all. Taylor seemed to forget about, what expenses were and ignored them because he wanted to make the best things possible. Stagg understood that Taylor's contributions were frankly integral to his success, but he knew he would make more money by producing just a shit ton of whiskey. Stagg's business methods were proving successful, as by 1882, they had purchased another distillery, the J. Swigert Taylor Distillery, which, another Taylor, that's a coincidence, right? No, this was actually a distillery that Taylor had bought for his son, and Taylor wasn't gonna have this. He did not want Stagg to come and ruin another thing linked to his family. And on top of that, the OFC distillery, the original one, was burned in a tragic lightning storm. He couldn't let Stagg ruin everything he began. Determined to protect his name and legacy, he struck a deal with Stagg that allowed him to reclaim the J. Swigert Taylor Distillery, while leaving the E.H. Taylor Jr. Company and all the distilleries that he started with Stagg behind him. This allowed him to focus on quality, and then Stagg could focus on volume. The father-son duo focused on producing whiskey their way and renamed the distillery the Old Taylor Distillery, forming the company H. Taylor Jr. and Sons. Now, H. Taylor was a man dedicated to quality and innovation. His new distillery was a full-ship distillery designed for bourbon tourism, with a European-style castle, beautiful gardens, and accessible transportation infrastructure, including a nearby train station and updated roads. Taylor also focused on several technical improvements, including the use of quality column stills over newer pot stills, high-quality copper fermentation tanks, state-of-the-art grain equipment, and a first-of-its-kind steam heating warehouse to have climate control for the aging rack houses. He also learned a lot from the Old Crow distillery and improved enhancements to the sour mash techniques, including a focus on employing small tubs, allowing unforced and spontaneous fermentation, double pot distillation, minimum of 8 years of aging, and 100 distilling out proof. All of this and more done to assure his whiskey was the best and highest quality available. Now, Taylor didn't just focus on the whiskey scene. He became mayor of Frankfurt from 1871 to 1877 and from 1881 to 1890. His experience in government is where he made his most major accomplishment, which is the lobbying of the federal government to pass the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897. This is really one of the earliest examples of a consumer protection law and acts as a stamp of approval from the government that any spirit, doesn't have to be just whiskey, is of good quality through a number of different requirements, including a minimum 4-year age statement, distillation in 1 season, 100 proof, and more. Now, the Old Taylor Distillery continued going strong until Prohibition hit in 1917, and they were forced to close. Taylor did not see his distillery reopen as he passed away on January 19th, 1923 at the age of 92. After Prohibition ended, the Old Taylor brand found a new home with National Distillers in 1933, Jim Beam in 1987, and then finally, Buffalo Trace bought the brand in 2009 before relaunching it as what it is now, the Colonel H. Taylor Jr. in 2011, different from Old Taylor of the past. The Old Taylor Distillery was sadly closed in 1972 and left to rot, abandoned. A few groups tried to revitalize the distillery but failed until Will Ulven and Westbury bought it in 2014. The former attorney and investment broker took 4 years to rebuild the property and reopened it in 2018 as Castle and Key. It was even added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2017. Castle and Key recently released their first bourbon in early 2022 that was made entirely on site in Taylor's old distillery. And the one I have here is actually batch 5. If you haven't had this one, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of not a personal favorite of mine, but I kind of like having it around. It's not super sweet. It feels like just off the nose alone. I don't know how else to describe it, other than kind of, it's a lot harsher than what Buffalo Trace makes. Absolutely. And it has kind of this earthy taste to it I hate to say it, but it kind of reminds me of Play-Doh. It's hard to drink this after drinking E.H. Taylor because this is so much better. This is harsh. The aftertaste is just difficult to deal with. It's a nice big ethanol bomb that comes through. You think that because it has this different kind of flavor profile than what you see with other bourbons, that might be fine, but it's almost like this grainy taste that comes through. They do contract distilling for other companies too. I especially see stuff for Pinhook. Honestly, if you can find it and want to honor the man that did it, this is a great way to go. What I've heard is Castle and Key's a great experience. I haven't been, but I'm not the biggest fan of how the batch 5 of the small batch tastes. Anyways, guys, that is my history of calling E.H. Taylor. If you guys have any more like fun facts or history about him, feel free to leave down below. I would love to hear. So thank you all. Cheers, and have a great one.